started as a sole proprietorship, which might have been okay, but I operated, in my opinion, incorrectly for a couple of years because I already had employees, and at the end of the year, tax season was like completely, it was like the worst season of the year because I would just get reamed. And that's when I finally changed, and then we incorporated, we became an LLC. But then there's also S-Corp, C-Corp, I mean, there's all kinds of different business entity types. And so let's talk to the guy who's like ready to make that jump. They are going to start a business. Maybe give a quick dictionary definition of some of those entity types.
Yeah. And so that's also a good segue for, when is it appropriate to talk to a lawyer? And that's one of the times when I would say red flag, the value of a business lawyer today isn't the paper to form the articles or whatever. It's the understanding and the dialogue and the education, and this particular type of business under these particular facts would lend themselves to this particular type of entity. And so that's probably a good cue. But the nutshell version as to what entity we would plug someone into, there's really only a handful that we would put someone in. And there's really, if you boil it all the way down, there's really only two: LLCs and corporations. And then there's branches off of those. So LLCs are limited liability companies. They're really partnerships that have that separate legal entity status that we talked about. So it's like, if I have a partnership, you and I create a partnership, we could write a partnership agreement. We write a little contract that we're in business together, okay? What's wrong with that? Well, in California, if we're in business together, then I'm responsible for your stuff and you're responsible for my stuff. So now things just got even worse from doing business by myself. Now I'm responsible for what you did. So that's why general partnerships and just writing partnership agreements with people is generally not a good idea. Now, what's the solution to that? Well, it's the LLC. We create that guy. It's Gary and Sean LLC, and we're the members of the LLC. Okay, so we can invest into him. We're not responsible for each other's stuff. It's just him. And we can separate our finances and our taxes and keep it all over there. And we can have an operating agreement between the two of us as to how we do business, okay? LLCs are great for smaller, lower revenue businesses as a general rule. We put, people who are doing a handful of rental homes or, a small food operation or holding land or whatever. It's a great start. It doesn't require as many formalities as a corporation. It's a little bit less expensive to maintain and to start. Just think of it as a more formalized partnership. And it doesn't have to be partners. Like one person can form an LLC. In that situation, the LLC typically doesn't pay any tax. It just gets profit or loss, and then the profit or loss hits your individual return on a K-1 form, which is just like, I profited this much or I lost this much, and then it just goes against my individual taxes. And that's the default for an LLC, is that it would be, we call that flow through, so there isn't a double tax. On the other hand, a corporation, corporations are great for anything that's going to go bigger, I would say. And they're, by the way, in California, LLCs not only pay income tax, but they pay franchise tax, gross revenue franchise tax. Any gross revenue you receive over $250,000 a year, you pay a little bit extra tax on. And so for smaller businesses, we're kind of sanding them to an LLC, but I always ask them, like, how quickly do you think you're going to go over 250? If they say a year, I might say, we probably need to talk corporation, because we don't have that extra gross revenue franchise tax on a corporation in California, like you have in an LLC. So there's a couple little quirky differences there. Like you get some benefit of less formality with an LLC, and yeah, it's simpler, easier, it's more functions like partnership, but you also have the downside of this gross revenue tax in California. So corporation is basically the shareholders are the owners. They appoint the board of directors, and the board of directors hires the CEO, the CFO, and the secretary. So there's three different hats to wear. Corporations are great if you've got people who want to invest in your business, but it's not necessarily a loan. It's like, hey, let's invest because we can split up into shares. We can give them shares in exchange for investment. Corporations are great for sometimes for family businesses where we really need to delineate between, okay, Sean is the CEO, he runs things. Dad is a big owner and dad wants to be on the board. So he doesn't want to do the day-to-day, but he wants to kind of touch base a couple of, maybe every other month or whatever. And so The board sets the vision, the CEO, the officers, secretary, treasurer, they carry out the mandate and they're operating, and it's the shareholders that are the owners. They have the equity. And so when you start to cut apart those different hats that you can wear in business, very valuable for business succession planning, for investment into the business, lots of things like that. So for people that are going to go bigger and they have that bigger vision beyond, something small or whatever, a lot of times we'll start moving them into the idea of a corporation.
So it sounds like, okay, let's talk about someone who might have to transition, because it's sounding like for Butler, we have crossed that 250,000 mark, and so now I should probably be thinking about, should I transition to a corporation?
Would take a look at it. We converted a lot, and you can convert from an LLC to a corporation. So you might want to talk to your CPA and just look at that. Just say, hey, am I paying this extra, gross revenue tax? How much is that? It's going to cost a little bit to convert to a corporation, but that's a good segue into the two flavors of ice cream. You got chocolate and vanilla, right? There's C-Corp, and when you form a corporation, by default, it's a C, which just means that the corporation receives income and it pays tax on the income it receives. It's going to dividend out to the shareholders, and then the shareholders are going to pay tax on the dividend revenue. That's the so-called double tax. When we form a corporation, that's how they are. S means that we make the S election under subchapter S of the tax code, that we don't want to do that. This is a small company. We're going to keep it to like 35 shareholders or less. We just want to flow that through, that profit or loss, kind of like I was saying with the LLC. Revenue comes in, expenses go out, we're going to figure out a profit or loss at the end of the year, we'll distribute it pro rata to the shareholders. That's an S Corp, okay? It's just a corp, it's the same idea, it's a separate legal entity, it's just a change in how we do the tax structure. So the corporation in an S Corp pays no tax, it just does a tax return and flushes through profit or loss, hits my individual return on a K-1. So
we talked about a sole proprietor who could be a freelancer or someone who has low risk and they're operating by themselves, no employees or anything like that. Then that person may want to convert into an LLC if they're wanting to go a little bit bigger. Now, a limited liability company, which basically shields them from some of the personal liability that they would have with a sole prop. But then if you're going even bigger than that, then maybe go to a corporation. Within corporation, we have C and S Corp. And one of the things that we haven't talked about is, touched on actually, is a partnership, which I've only heard bad things.